Before we get started, obviously we're going to talk about Cloudfront today. Let me just ask, how many people here would say, I'm brand new to Cloudfront? Don't be shy, it's okay. I'm brand new to Cloudfront, I'll raise my hand too. Okay, good. And then how many would say, I'm a practitioner, I've been using it, I've got some experience? Anybody? Great. Okay, thank you very much. Well, next slide here. So I'm Chris Seitz. I'm with Clean Slate, and give you a little background on our company. We've been around for a number of years, going all the way back to 2000. We like to feel that we're one of the best places to work in Indiana, and hope our employees feel the same way. We're glad to be presenting today. Our practices are in the areas of cloud, DevOps, and application development, especially in the cloud native space, and applications, modernizing applications as they move from legacy platforms into the cloud. Our practices are all in that space. You can see our partners on the screen. We've listed some of our major partners. We actually have many more as we work with our clients and provide solutions. But you're welcome to go out to our website. We have a full list out there as well. I mentioned earlier that I oversee the cloud consulting practice for Clean Slate and all the services that we just mentioned. Presenting with me today, and actually doing most of the presenting today, is Stephen Saylor. Stephen is our senior consultant, and he is on track to have more AWS certifications than the average person should. So he's well underway and successfully driving in that direction. So anyway, a little background about Clean Slate, and with that, I'll turn everything over to Stephen.
Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, we are Clean Slate Technology Group, which, by the way, Chris, I want to talk to you. I have an idea for the company that I think we should look at.
Okay, Stephen, this is a little off script. We're supposed to be here talking about...
I know, it'll just take a second.
Okay.
I've been thinking, I know we do the cloud thing, we do the technology thing, but I think... Well, yes, that's why we're here, but I think we should actually stop that and get into the travel business. I mean, we can keep the branding, we don't even have to change much.
All right, you really kind of caught me off guard here, Stephen. I mean, the folks here are wanting to hear about Cloudfront, and travel's not really our thing, so I guess I'm a little bit caught off guard. I mean, where are you going with this?
I mean, I've been thinking about it for a while, all right? And on my spare time, I've been putting together a website. I even put a marketing video or promotional video out there for us. I mean, I think this is a market that we could really get into.
You know, I have to admit, I like travel, but I just, like you said, this isn't really our thing, and I don't know, I guess maybe if we had a website and we could at least test the waters a little bit. I mean, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, we can host this, we can see how the market responds. Come on.
Yeah, I guess I'd take a look, but I'd have to see more.
All right, that's fair. Give me like 2 minutes. I'll put together some
2
infrastructure.
minutes. Let's make it a quick 2 minutes.
All right. Here we go. This is going to work.
Yeah, you're going to have to explain this to me.
All right, that's fair. So if we take a look at this, we have DNS routing with Route 53. I was figuring we could purchase Clean Slate, tg.cloud. It's pretty close, you know. We have private networking with VPC, so we can host our resources in. We have SSL certs with Certificate Manager. We have load balancing with application load balance. Might cut out. Oh, there we go. Thanks. We have web servers with EC2 instances, and we even have capacity scaling with auto scaling. I mean, this is good because it's highly available. We're in multiple availability zones. It's self-healing because we're using auto scaling for instances. It's got a small attack surface because there's only the application load balancer and the public subnets, so it reduces our risk. And we're using SSL for our web traffic.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I can see some downsides to all this. You know, I mean, in the grand scheme of things and the way, you know, we're able to deliver today, I mean, this still feels a little costly, a little heavy, and I see some maintenance in the background with having to deal with all of our own instances. And I'm really concerned about the experience from the user in terms of latency. So, I mean, all in all, this just feels a little heavy. I mean, frankly, it's a good, architecture for maybe the old way of doing things, but I don't know. I guess I'm thinking of something a little more modern.
Oh. Okay, that's fair. That's good feedback.
Yeah.
But I can fix it. Just give me a shot.
All right, we'll give it another try. I'm still kind of interested. I'm intrigued. But.
1 minute, I'll fix it. Boom.
Wow, all right. Now, this is a very different diagram here.
So let me break it down. We're still using DNS with Route 53, so we'll have our clean slate tg.cloud, but instead of the VPC, instead of the servers and the auto-scaling, we're going to use S3 for our file storage and for our web hosting. This is good because it's cheap. It's got no patching because there's no instances. And it's highly available because S3 is across at least 3 availability zones.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting there. I mean, it's clearly much more affordable. I mean, who wouldn't like that? And I get that you addressed some of the patching and high maintenance, but I still see some problems here. And, for example, we need SSL. We can't just bypass security. We don't want to overlook that. And we're still not addressing latency and performance. And, I mean, we want this thing to hyperscale, so we got to think through those things too. And come on, I mean, we're just going to take S3 buckets and expose them to the internet. I mean, it feels like a kind of a rookie way of doing things. So I don't know. This just doesn't seem like something I think would be attractive to end users.
Oh. Okay. Give me one more shot. I think I know what to do. I can do this.
All right. I have to admit I'm losing a little patience here, but one more try.
I'll be quick. Just 1 minute. 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah. All right.
Here we go. I think this is a winner.
This one's different.
Let me break it down. So we're still using DNS with Route 53 and our clean slate tg.cloud. Yeah. We have SSL certs back for secured web traffic. We're using S3 for our file storage, but we're going to introduce using Cloudfront for our content caching and for our web hosting.
Okay, now this one's new to me. Cloudfront, I've never used it. You're going to have to explain that to me a little bit more.
Sure. Okay, so Cloudfront is Amazon's content delivery network. So essentially, they have a bunch of smaller servers across the globe for caching content closer to users.
All right, so far so good.
So they're called edge locations. Now, edge locations, they're different than regions or availability zones. And there are more regions than there are availability zones. Now, it works on the premise of distributions. Distributions are groups of objects to cache. So there are web distributions, which are for static files, your HTML, CSS, pictures, and RTMP for media streaming. So it is much faster content delivery. There's over 200 edge locations across the world. It allows for SSL certifications because it can attach those certs to the Cloudfront distribution, and currently it's the only way to provide S3 content with SSL.
Well, that's good.
It can be used with a variety of origins, so that the sources that we need to pull our images or pull our files from. So those could be S3, EC2, ECS, so containers, or even non-AWS resources. And finally, it's cheap.
It's affordable. I like that.
So this is good because it is cheap. It doesn't require any patching. It's still highly available because of both S3 and now the edge locations. It's secure. It doesn't need to actually expose the S3 bucket. We can provide access to CloudFront only to that S3 bucket. It has secured SSL traffic. It actually gives us some DDoS protection because it allows Amazon to handle the scaling in cases where you might be under DDoS. And it's fast performance at scale since you're caching your data closer to your user.
Yeah, I think this is great. What do you guys out there think? All right. I think this is great. What do you guys out there think? right, much better. This is great, Stephen. We should do this. Let's go full steam ahead.
Sweet. All right.
Show us how it's built, though.
Let's do this. Will you guys help me out? All right. So let's take a look at our Make It Real checklist. And all right, so we need to get our Route 53. We need to get our SSL certificate. We need to create an S3 private bucket. Our website files up there, Cloudfront distribution. All right. So let's start one at a time with register our domain. All right, here we are in Route 53. And as we can see, there's already one hosted zone, but we're going to go through the process of what would it look like to acquire a new DNS. And right here we have register a domain. So let's look up clean slate tg.cloud. Check. All right, this one is unavailable, not com, cloud. But if we were going to purchase a domain, we could add it to cart, very similar to what you would do with your Amazon shopping experience. You would check out. At that point, you would get a request for some information to register with this with DNS. They would ask you to verify, and at some point later, DNS is kind of inconsistent on how long it might take. It could be up to 24 hours for your domain to be available. Now, in our case, we have already acquired the cleanslatetg.cloud domain for that very reason, because it's unpredictable on how long it takes. So first step is actually done. We can see our name servers and our startup authority servers. Awesome. Register our domain. Check. Next thing we want to do is get our SSL certificate with that domain. So if we come over here, let's open this in a new tab. Certificate manager. We're going to say provision certificates, and then we're going to request a public certificate. You can get private certificates, but know that they cost. So let's request. Now, if we were to go through here, and I'm actually going to switch my region. Certificate Manager, while other services are global, Certificate Manager is not. As you can see here, we actually have a certificate for cleanslatetg.cloud, but let's walk through the process of requesting a new one. So our public, we can come in here and say clean, let's do a star cert. So one thing to note when you're making SSL certificates with the certificate manager is you have the option to add another name to your certificate. So if you want to have subdomains or even like your your www. You're going to need to use a star cert. You're also going to want to get the base domain or your zone apex, so your tg.cloud. And you're going to want to have both of those so that Cloudfront can use subdomains, your www, and your base domain. We could say next, and then it'll give you an option of how you want to validate, either over an email or over DNS. And from there, it would ask you to put some entries into your Route 53 or whoever your provider is. It doesn't have to be Route 53, but it's kind of nice because it plugs in and plays well with other Amazon services. So we're actually going to cancel out of this because if we just push that, it would take us to the next screen. We can see in here where we have our zone apex and our wildcard cert. And if we wanted to see what those looked like, we can do our CNAMEs. And there we go. Now we're going to do, what's next on our list? All right, create a private S3 bucket. So this is going to be for our files. If we come over here to S3, you see that I have a couple different buckets in there. We've actually already pre-created this and loaded it, but we're going to go through the process. So let's create a bucket, and let's call it clean slate tg.cloud. Now remember that S3 buckets have to be globally unique. And that's not just on your account, but that's across the world. So we're just going to have a -1, seems to take that. And for this step so far, we're just going to take the defaults. Here's our bucket. If we look in here, our properties, nothing's turned on by default. What's our permissions? We have all public access off, so we have a private bucket. We don't have any access given through the ACLs or through bucket policies at this moment. All right, copy our website files to our S3 bucket. Now in this case, I already have my media in another bucket because copying from the Amazon backbone is much quicker than it is for my network to copy up. So I'm just going to come here, select all of this, say copy, go back to my S3, click here, and paste. It's going to ask me, do I want to confirm? And yes, it will add my files into that bucket. There we go. Now you could do this through several different variations. You could do this through the console, through your CLI, through whatever tool you choose. So we've copied our website files. Everybody with me so far? Great. All right, now for the Cloudfront distribution. All right, here we are. If you make note, Cloudfront is a global service. You can see that I already have 2 out there, but let's walk through the process. Let's create a distribution. Now here's our 2 types of distributions we talked about, either web or our RTMP. In this case, we just want to host some pretty simple website files, some images. Let's just do the web distribution. All right, now there's a lot here. So what are the fields that we need in this situation? Because not all of these are going to be applicable for what we're doing here today. First off is we want to give a name for our origin. Now in this case, we're going to be using S3. So if we look through our list, we have our clean slate tg-cloud. This is telling Cloudfront, use that S3 bucket that we just created as our source of our files. Here we go. Origin path we're not going to do. This would allow you to pick like a subfolder within that bucket. In our case, it's just right at the root directory, so we don't need to mess with that. Our origin ID, if we look here, it's just a description. I'm just going to take the default. Restrict bucket access. All right, this one's important. In this case, we're going to say yes. This is that don't make our bucket public step. We want to keep that bucket private, but still allow Cloudfront to access it. And we do that through this option here. There's this origin access identity, or OAI, that will allow for this process. In that case, I don't have an identity already existing that would allow for that communication between S3 and Cloudfront. So I want to create a new identity. And here we can give a comment or a name to it. I'm just going to take the default. And right here is a little attribute that I promise if you forget to check in this process will give you headaches. Grant read permissions on bucket. No, I will update permissions, or yes, update my bucket policy. So if we say yes, which we want to do, this will go into that S3 bucket and make that bucket policy change for us. If not, you have to go back later and do it yourself, which is an easy step to overlook, and it will cause errors to come up in your browser if you try this. We're going to say yes. We're not going to worry about custom headers. We're going to want to redirect our HTTP traffic to HTTPS, just kind of a good practice. We're going to skip these until we come down here. So our minimum TTL, maximum TTL, and default TTL. All right, TTL, time to live. In this case, since this is caching servers, this is telling Cloudfront how long do we want to store that object before we retrieve it? Now this is important because, especially let's say with our website, if we're going to make changes and we upload, we make a change and then we re-upload, we go to see that change, it's not there because it's still cached based on the TTL policies. Now once those expire, it will go back out. If it needs it, it will re-grab it. But it's important to know if you're making changes that this TTL will definitely play a factor, and you need to come up with a good TTL that meets your use case or your situation. Now there's a way to address that also that we'll get to called invalidation. So if you still need to force it to update, you have that option. But be mindful of what your TTLs are. In our case, we're just going to take the defaults. We're not going to mess with any of these. We're going to come down here to distribution settings, and OK. Alternate domain names, CNAMEs. So what is this? This is the URLs that we want to hit this Cloudfront distribution from. This is actually one of two parts for using your own URLs. In our case, we want to have two. We want www.cleanslatetg.cloud, and we want just the base domain of cleanslatetg.cloud. So we're going to actually go ahead and add both of those in here. Okay, so we have those, but those won't actually take effect unless we come down here and we use a custom SSL cert. So by default, Cloudfront has an SSL certificate, but it can only be used with the Cloudfront provided URL. In our case, we want to pick the certificate that we have, which is the cleanslatetg.cloud certificate that we created earlier. Now we have that set up. We're going to come down here, and there is one other attribute that we want to look at, which is the default root object. This tells Cloudfront, where is my starting point? So maybe index.html might be a good one for our website. You may have a different need per your situation or per your use case, but since we're just trying to host a static site, we want to go to our index.html page. Great. That is the setup of our Cloudfront distribution. Now, if we were to click here, we could click on that. It would go through. It would push out and create a new distribution across the different edge locations around the world, which can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours. In our case, it's already been pre-done, so we don't make you guys awkwardly wait. All right. Yeah, well, I mean, CloudFront, while it does take a while, it's pushing, in our case, because we picked all the different regions, to over 200 different edge locations across the world. So even though it's slow, it's kind of fast considering what it's doing. OK, so we have our distribution here. It's all set up. We can see our alternate domain names, our SSL cert, our index.html. Great. It looks set up to me. All right. So next we have to, update our S3 bucket policy for CloudFront. Now in our case, we told CloudFront, do this for me. But let's take a look at what that actually looks like so you know what's going on. All right, here we are in S3. Let's go to the bucket that distribution is using as its origin. We come up here to permissions. We have bucket policies. Here we have an allow policy for that origin access identity that CloudFront created for us to get our objects from CloudFront. So this is giving that behind the scenes access without making the bucket public to the rest of the world. So far, so good? Great. All right, so remember I told you when we added the alternate domain names, that was one of two steps. The second part of that to make that fully work is to add the routing piece, which is in Route 53. So we need to tell Route 53 to route traffic to our CloudFront distribution. So you can see here that we have a www.cleanslatetg.cloud, and we have which is an A record, and I'll explain that in a second. And then we have a cleanslatetg.cloud A record. But you can see this little alias piece here, because you might be saying, aren't A records IP records? You're right. But since we're using Route 53, Amazon plays nicely with its own its own services. So if we say www.cleanslatetg.cloud, we have an IP address, there's this alias button. And what it does is it gives us a drop-down of all the different services that we could use to hook in with this. Now, why is this important? We can see our Cloudfront distribution right here. This is important because there is a small fee associated to CNAME lookups. So if you want to kind of mitigate your cost on that, you can use A records as aliases in Amazon and let them resolve the IP for you, because you don't get an IP address for Cloudfront, you get a CNAME. Make sense? Finally, last step is test. Let's see how it works. Here we go. Here's our website. This is something that you can hit as well on your phone or on your laptop as well. So let's take a look. See, Chris, told you I had a site. We've got images. We've got the promotional video here. It's looking good. It looks like everything's hosted correctly. But let's see how the video streams. Looks like it's streaming well. It's buffering well. That streamed really well. And thank you. Something that you don't actually see, though, is that video is 160 megs. It streamed very smoothly, it streamed very well, no latency, no issues, because it's cached on an edge location. Probably somewhere for us, it's either Ohio or it's probably up in like Chicago.
The video's from O'Hare, the O'Hare edge location.
Okay, so this video is actually coming from the O'Hare edge location. Thank you.
And the content's actually coming from Washington.
Okay, and the content is coming from Washington. Thank you. All right, Chris, what do you think?
I'm ready to go. What about you guys?
All right, let's take a look. All right, so what about our what ifs and what abouts? Let's answer some of the questions of why did we pick what we picked, and let's take a look at what we could have done. So what if we need to change an object in S3 and have it immediately take effect? So remember when we talked about the TTLs, but if you make an update to your website, you go out there to see it and it's not there because that TTL hasn't expired yet. So what's doing an invalidation look like? Let's do one live. So if we come over here to Cloudfront, we're in our Cloudfront distribution, and there's up here a tab for invalidations. So you can see I have a couple invalidations. Let's create an invalidation. Now, in our case, we're just going to invalidate the whole cache, and we're going to say, go repick it back up from the origin. So we can just do a star and invalidate. Now what this is doing, it'll take a few minutes, but it's going back out, it's saying all edge locations, what you have is no longer valid. Go back to our bucket, which is currently in Virginia, pull that content down and host that content. And this will take a few minutes, but once it's done, it'll just say complete, and all the edge locations, once it's asked for or retrieved, should pull it when it needs it. Yes, sir.
During that time, is the websites on the edge nodes, are they still up?
Yes.
The old data, and then will be a frequent web page?
Oh, yeah, sorry. The question was, and correct me if I'm wrong, once you're going through an invalidation, is the website still hosted across the different edge locations? The answer is yes. Your website doesn't go down during an invalidation process. It just goes out and retrieves the new objects. Good question. All right, what if I add a new object to my S3 bucket? How long will I have to wait until it's available in Cloudfront? So there's the difference between cached objects, which the TTL applies to, and new objects. Once you drop a new object in the bucket, Cloudfront recognizes that it doesn't have that object, and it will go out and pull it immediately. So you don't have to wait. You may have to wait a few seconds just for it to actually propagate across the different edge locations, but you don't have to wait for that time to live. Now, if you want to update that object, now since it's no longer a new object, it will fall under the TTL and will need to be invalidated and then re-pulled from the origin. What if we host our web page in S3 only? Which we could. That second diagram was actually kind of outlining using just S3 for a website. So what would that look like? So here in S3, we have a bucket, and it is in, where is it? No, Cloudfront. Right here. This bucket is hosted in Sydney, Australia, and it is not using Cloudfront. So if we come over here, we can see it says public. Well, one thing that we have to do when using the S3 bucket is make it public to the world so that people can access those files. Now, how do they hit a URL, though? There's a setting here in properties called static web hosting. And if we enable this on our bucket and tell it which files to go to, this is very similar to that default root object that we did in Cloudfront. This is our entry point into our bucket. Once you hit your URL, it will resolve. Now, in our case, we could put a CNAME in front of this. I didn't for here, but let's take a look at what this bucket looks like in Sydney. Looks good. Looks like everything's rendering. Great. Now, similar what about is, what if we host the web page in an S3 bucket far away? What do we do if we host it in a bucket far away? What would that do to our performance? I mean, when we pulled that page up, it actually seemed to be pretty quick, considering it's coming from Sydney, Australia. So let's play around with it a little bit. Let's get a feeling for it. Another thing to consider here is it shows that it's not secure, so we don't have our SSL cert. All right, I mean, it pulled pretty quick. Let's do a refresh. Pretty good. Let's take a look at our video. Oh, that's less than ideal. Oh, we're back though, okay. Or not. Point being, there's a pretty clear distinction between the bucket that we hosted far away and the Cloudfront distribution. And while it's close to us, that if we hosted this in a bucket in Virginia or Ohio, we may not have the same latency problems. But we can't guarantee that our customer base isn't in Sydney or our customer base isn't in a further location, so they might see this experience while you see a good experience. So we did some performance testing around this. We had a bucket, an S3 bucket in Sydney, the one we actually just looked at, and we actually created another bucket in Sydney and put Cloudfront in front of it. So here's what we found when we did that. The S3 bucket had an average performance time of 709 milliseconds. Now comparing that to the Cloudfront distribution of 71 milliseconds. Now this is tested from a server here in Indy. That is a 1,000% improvement. And if we look, the total cost in the upper right-hand corners, it was 5 cents for the S3, and it's 10 cents for the Cloudfront distribution. So for 5 cents more, we got 1,000% better improvement. So in this case, with our pricing for this, for S3, we're looking at 2 1/3 cents per gig per month for our standard storage. And data transfer out to Cloudfront is actually free. Now, our Cloudfront pricing transfers out to the internet. Keep in mind, pricing varies depending on the location it's retrieved from. For the US and Canada, it's about 8.5 cents per gig. And then per request for HTTP, it's less than a penny per 10,000. And for HTTPS, it's a penny for 10,000. And here's our invalidations that we talked about. It's half a penny per path per month after the first 1,000, which are free. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're hosting a bunch of different objects, that price can add up. So be cautious about how often and what you invalidate. So some things that we could do to make the site better. I mean, all in all, we just hosted a serverless static website out there for marketing purposes. We have video content, images. We're not using servers, VPC, simple design. It's secured. We're using SSL. But what could we do to make it better? Well, we could add the ability for users to create accounts and logins. So we could use Amazon Cognito for that. You create an account, and maybe we would secure certain content or have, log into your profile, book, whatever. With that, we could actually add some dynamic data with API Gateway. So we put an API in to give us some of that data back and forth. That's where we could start doing book a reservation, look up flights, look up deals. We could add a submission form for the marketing page for a confirmation email with Lambda and SES, or simple email service. So you fill out a form, you click submit, you get a confirmation email saying, thank you for registering with us. A associate will be in contact with you soon. We could add a CI or CD pipeline with code build and code pipeline. So we make our changes, we check them in, and from our Git repo, it automatically deploys. And you could build in your invalidation piece for just the objects you needed in that. There's a lot more we could do too. All right, gotchas and gremlins. These are the things that, like anything in tech, it seems like it's going to go well. It may not always go so well. So what are some of those gotchas and gremlins? Invalidations, like what we talked about. It is a cost per path for the objects being invalidated. And you're going to probably want to target only objects that you need to invalidate or change the time to live to be more appropriate for your situation. Custom SSL certs and alternate domain names. So when you're adding alternate domain names, you can only add alternate domain names that are covered under that cert. Otherwise, it'll throw an error to you. Default root object. If you don't provide that, Cloudfront doesn't know what your entry point is. So it's going to throw an error and say, I don't know where to go. And then Route 53 entries are needed. So we talked about how there's a two-step process for your URLs. There is the alternate domain name, but then there's also the routing piece with Route 53. And if you forget that, Cloudfront's not going to know what to do because it can't actually be routed to. So, and we talked about for cost optimization, use your A records instead of CNAME records to cut down on some of those CNAME lookup costs. So there's a lot more in Cloudfront than what we just covered. There's Lambda at Edge, WebSockets with Cloudfront, signed cookies, geo restrictions, and a lot more. So if we recap, what did we learn today? We learned about Amazon CloudFront. What are edge locations? What are distributions? What are our types of different distributions? How do we set up a static web page using S3 and CloudFront? How do we configure CloudFront? What are origins? How do we do custom SSL certs? What are alternate domain names? What's our default root object? And what are our bucket policies, and how do we update them? I am Steven Saylor, and this has been Chris Seitz.
That was just amazing. I just got a call back from the board of directors. We are now Clean Slate Travel. Okay, we're not. Yeah, let's have a hand here for Steven. That was so good. We're going to promote Steven to our Chief Innovation Officer, effective at a later date.
We might have to talk about that.
We'll get back to you on that. Anybody have any questions for Steven? Last call on questions. Got a question right here.
I saw your mountain of like certifications there. What resources do you use for those?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Resources you use for your certifications?
Oh, you're talking about my AWS certifications? Yeah. I used A Cloud Guru. I used Linux Academy. I did hands-on. Yep, A Cloud Guru platform. I think they're based out of the UK. Okay. I use both of those in tandem, and it's helped me get my certs.